Hey everyone, I'm sure you've heard about the recent controversy over Planned Parenthood supposedly selling the bodies of aborted fetuses for profit. Well, I'm sure by now you've also heard that that actually wasn't really true. Planned Parenthood apparently gives the body parts, donates them. Certain local chapters, from what I understand, donate them. They don't receive any kind of profit from it. They're just reimbursed to some degree for the cost of shipping and other costs incurred in the act of actually shipping the parts. Um, well, I just wanted to say very quickly, I can understand why this really gets a lot of people's goat, but I don't think it logically makes sense to be outraged at this particular practice on Planned Parenthood's part unless one begins with a pro-life viewpoint. If you're not someone who's fundamentally pro-life, who believes that prenatal human life has as much inherent value and worth as postnatal human life, or at any rate enough worth to be worthy of protection from harm, from the harm that abortion represents, if you're not someone who operates from that premise, then I don't actually see why you would oppose what Planned Parenthood is doing in this instance. After all, from what I understand, these fetal body parts are being donated to advance the cause of science, and the research that's done with them can actually lead to medical breakthroughs that can save a lot of human lives. And of course, we're talking about fetuses that have already been aborted and that would otherwise almost certainly end up in medical waste disposal bins anyway. So, to my way of thinking, it makes sense for Planned Parenthood to adopt this policy and to dispose of fetal remains in this manner. I totally understand the concerns and convictions of the pro-life crowd. Some years ago, maybe a decade or so ago, when I was in college, when I hadn't yet firmly fixed my political orientation in my mind, I explored a lot of different political movements, and one of them was the pro-life movement. Even to this day, though I no longer think of myself as pro-life per se, I do still understand where pro-lifers are coming from. Although I've come around to a basically pro-choice policy position, I actually agree that prenatal human life is just that, human life. Frankly, I don't think that's a matter of opinion at all. I think it's a matter of scientific fact. Unfortunately, I think one of the most unfortunate things about public discourse surrounding the abortion controversy is the tendency of far too many pro-choicers to pretend or posit that, a fetus in utero is not really a human life, that it's I've heard it called a blob of protoplasm. I've heard it called a pre-human mass. All of that is inaccurate. Okay, I think it's scientifically accurate based on all the evidence that I've seen that human life begins at conception. When you have even just a fertilized egg that's embedded in the wall of the uterus and is beginning to develop at the beginning of a pregnancy, that is a brand new organism, a new human being in and of itself that happens to be located within the mother's body, that's growing and being nourished by the mother's body, and that happens to depend on the mother's body for sustenance and survival for the first 9 months of its existence. But that doesn't mean that it isn't a human life. Certainly an abortion is not like a tonsillectomy or an appendectomy. It's not just the removal of a part of the woman's body that she doesn't need or want. You're talking about the killing of an organism, a living being. It's a separate organism unto itself. The fact that it's located within the mother's body doesn't change that. And, obviously the act of abortion kills it. But, I have come around to supporting abortion rights because at the end of the day, the fetus is not conscious, it's not self-aware. For most of the early stage of the pregnancy, when the vast majority of abortions take place, it can't feel pain. And so, that core of a human being with a whole internal universe of thoughts and hopes and fears that make human life so critical and unique and special and valuable later on in the organism's development aren't present yet. And when you take those facts into account and weigh them against a woman's tremendous interest in being able to control her own body and her own destiny and her own life choices and her life path, and of course when you consider the incredible physical trauma and burden of pregnancy and childbirth, and the difficulties of raising even just one child in this world. At the end of the day, where I used to come down on narrowly on the pro-life side, now I come down more on the pro-choice side. Certainly as a matter of public policy. Frankly, even when I considered myself pro-life back in the day, I never went so far as to think that abortion should be legally banned. I thought that would always have been a public policy disaster, if only because, it would have, it's far from eradicating abortion, it would have driven abortions underground into the hands of back alley practitioners, in the same way that alcohol prohibition simply drove the alcohol business into the hands of the criminal underworld, and in the same way that the war on drugs and prohibition of prostitution don't stamp out drug use or prostitution, but simply give the criminal element a massive new black market off of which to profit. So, even when I thought of myself as pro-life in principle, I was still pro-choice in practice or as a matter of policy. Even now, I think it's valuable since, I think human life in the womb is real and should be given a chance if it can be without prejudicing or compromising the mother's bodily integrity and personal autonomy. I think that society should rely on non-coercive means of trying to reduce or minimize the abortion rate. But none of those means should include taking choice out of a pregnant woman's hands. But, with all of that said, anyone who ultimately thinks that, a woman should be able to terminate a pregnancy, especially in the early stages of the pregnancy, without any kind of interference from outside forces, particularly the government, it doesn't make any sense to be outraged at what Planned Parenthood is doing here, right? From what I understand, it's been demonstrated that Planned Parenthood does seek and secure the consent of these women who are having these abortions before it decides how to dispose of the fetal remains. And to me, that's the key point. Obviously, the fetus is not developed enough to make that choice itself. God knows. And, at the end of the day, the next best person to make that decision would be the mother. The mother consents to have the fetal body parts disposed of in that way. Who's to say that she shouldn't be able to do that? Especially when, it can benefit society and save so many other human lives. I mean, when human beings, in their wills, a lot of people choose to have their bodies not buried or cremated or embalmed, but donated to science. No one complains about that, right? So I think this is analogous to that. So I don't think there's anything wrong with Planned Parenthood. Apparently they're not selling these body parts for profit, but even if they were, I don't think there would be anything fundamentally wrong with that, on a moral level. Now, again, if you are pro-life, root, stem, and branch, it makes sense for you to be appalled at this practice, but you've got bigger problems to worry about. Getting Planned Parenthood to stop disposing of fetal remains in this way isn't going to save the lives of any fetuses, because they'll still be carrying out the abortions themselves anyway, and at the end of the day, that is the main concern, or at least it should be the main concern for pro-lifers. So, I have to disagree with all of those who are trying to make political hay out of this issue. I'm sorry, but this is beyond even a tempest in a teapot. This particular controversy is really very misguided and misdirected. Pro-lifers really have bigger fish to fry, if you ask me. And pro-choicers, or people who are undecided on the issue, really have no principled, logical reason to object to what Planned Parenthood is apparently doing here. That's my honest view. So I look forward to all of your feedback as always. Pushback, agreement, it's all welcome. Looking forward to the discussion, folks. Sayonara.